Okay, just to let you know, because we're moving on the schedule, I asked our guests who were here at the end of the calendar to graciously come back tomorrow morning, which they have agreed to do, but we still need to move through this calendar. Next, we have the Personnel Committee. We have two matters on the issue. One is a proposed bylaw amendment on first read. The second regards our interim executive director. The first matter, I'm going to ask the interim executive director to remain, and I'm going to ask her to leave the room when we discuss the second matter. So, without further ado,
Will we take a Rajiv? Are we ever able to take just a short break, or would you prefer people just do that on their own? It's up to you, whatever.
Yeah, I'd prefer you do that on your own because we do need to. Thank you, Past President Pickett. I appreciate that.
Sorry, those guests were for the next legislative discussion.
That is coming. You mean the CPD?
Yeah. No, they were for the legislative discussion. Did you tell them to go? I can call them. I just want to make sure.
I thought they were. I asked them if they were for CPD.
So one of them is coming back tomorrow, but not both. Control yourself. Is there a problem?
I asked for their CPD, and they said they were from CPD. Okay. They don't need both of them. I don't need one from. All right. Okay. Personnel Committee matters. Governor Stevens from Chair of Personnel Committee. Would you inform us about on the first read of the proposed bylaw?
Okay. So, as I mentioned to you before, this is a proposed bylaw that would limit any individual serving as WSBA Executive Director to 10 years. As I mentioned to you before, when I first heard this, I thought that was also talking about the contract term. Governor Swigel showed me the error of my ways. What he was talking about was the total time in service in that capacity. So that is basically, in a nutshell, what it is. That an executive director would not serve longer than 10 years. I would look at that as 10 consecutive years, but 10 years. And so I guess as the chair, I will move it.
Second.
Well, it's just a reading.
Oh, it's just a read, so it doesn't even.
So there's no action allowed to be taken on this motion.
Okay.
Actually,
so it doesn't even get placed on.
That's right.
Okay, good enough.
I mean, if you were prepared with amendments, you could discuss them or put on the table. You can bring them for next time or meditate on it, just to introduce it and discuss it. And we can discuss it. Please lower your hands for the moment.
I'm sorry.
No worries. Perfect.
There's one other thing, and I do want. I do call. So when I was talking to Governor Clark about his ad, please note that so I have an alternative here, and it really is just a matter of where would you place this bylaw change. So when it came in front of the committee, but it was under vacancy. And then I looked at it again because I kept saying, what does this have to do with anything? And yes, there's discussion about the executive director's duties, et cetera, but I thought the better place was actually under the bylaws talking about terms of office. And that's where I would add that the executive director serves at the direction of the BOG and has an annual performance review, and there, no individual shall serve as executive director for 10 more years. This is in front of you. It's my proposed substitute, and my intent would be to go back to personnel to have them take a look at the two, what was passed out of committee. This was not passed out of committee, but I think it's a better place to put it. So,
thank you, Governor Stevens. As a point of information, I'll ask Director Nevitt to speak on this matter and her perspectives, and then we'll go around the room.
Thank you. Well, as I stated at the Personnel Committee, I'm not opposed to placing a term limit on the executive director position. I do agree that it's healthy for an organization to have turnover in the executive director position. And I also think that if the Board of Governors at some point felt that that term limit was getting in the way, they could always amend the bylaws at that point. So I'll just reiterate here that I don't have an opposition to the bylaw amendment.
Governor Angelville.
I also do not have an opposition to it. It sounds reasonable to me.
Governor Cicchetti. No worries. We'll come back. Governor Tollefson.
I have no objections to this.
Governor Grabicki.
I think I have more experience than anybody else in this room serving on nonprofit boards, large nonprofit boards with large budgets bigger than this organization. I think this is an unnecessarily disruptive measure. I could cite you to 5 different organizations that I have been a board member and president of, and tell you that on each one of them, if we had had this particular provision, we would have gone through needless disruption when we had a very fine executive director. I think that this motion is a reaction to recent history. I understand the motivation, but I think that it is ill-considered. If you do this, Julie says, well, you can always amend the bylaws. You get a fine executive director, and she or he are in their 8th year, and they're looking around going, 2 years, I'm gone. I better start looking, because I'm a highly qualified individual. And they start looking, and they find something. And the 9th year, you decide, well, we'll amend. And they say to you, I'm already gone. I've gotten a better deal. You've created needless disruption. What you should be doing in personnel each year, when you evaluate the executive director, one standard question: are we getting to the end of our rope with this particular individual? Are we beginning to? And if you think that you are beginning to, you start to have a discussion with that executive director. I think that your time is limited now. I think we're getting ready for a change. Nothing preeminent. We want to do this in a graceful way, but probably in another year from now, we're going to start a search. We want you to be part of the search. But we just want to let you know what's happening. That's the way to run an organization. This is crazy.
Tell us how you really feel.
Governor Abell. Governor Kane. Governor Peters. Governor Higgins.
I support this motion. I think it's an excellent idea. We discussed this in personnel, and I am firmly of the opinion that 10 years is long enough for anyone to serve. And I, with all due respect to Governor Grabicki's observations, I do still support this idea, and I'll vote in favor of it when we finally are at that point.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly support this amendment. 10 years is a long time for someone to be in control of an organization as powerful as this. Up and around that time and beyond, with personal relationships with the court, with the amount of power, political power that this ED amasses over that period of time, it becomes very difficult to get such a person out of office. Our most recent experience with that, resulting in investigations and litigation and all, talk about needless disruption. Wow. What did that cost? $400,000? I don't know. I think that this is the only way to avoid that sort of amassing of power and influence. And yes, if we have someone that is working out so perfectly, essentially it just requires a supermajority vote to override their termination by amending or waiving in some manner the bylaw provision. So I would much rather have that hurdle to have to get over than the hurdle of massive political pressure of, everything we witnessed being repeated again.
I think we need to give Governor Grabicki's comments some serious thought. I think that this is an unnecessary amendment to the bylaws, and I think our bylaws should be amended sparingly. The board, of course, has authority to terminate the executive director's position at any time. Is 10 years a long time to serve in the position? Yes. And if the board wanted to have it be a shorter time, it could. I think artificially putting 10 years in the bylaws is both unfair to the board, future boards, and unfair to the executive director. It's unfair to future boards because if you have an executive director who's terrible in year 8 or 9, the political pressure is going to be, well, they're going to be gone in 2 years anyway, so just leave them on for 2 years. It's unfair to an executive director. It's also unfair to the board because if we have an excellent executive director who wants to stay on for a couple more years after 10 and the board wants to keep them on, then it requires a bylaw change for something that shouldn't need to require a bylaw change. And I think it's unfair to the executive director because the executive director, you may want to stay on for longer with the blessing of the board, but we have this artificial line in place. I think it could have a chilling effect on our search for a new executive director if we are saying, hey, we're offering this job, but there's an absolute maximum of 10 years on it. And I don't think that's good. I think organizations need turnover, but there's a really important difference between the governors and the executive director. The reason that we have term limits on governor rules is the governors set the policy and the direction of the Bar Association. The executive director is the employee we hire to carry out that direction. This is treating the executive director like a governor. I know that's not the way that we're set up. If the executive director has gone awry and is not carrying out the mission of the Board of Governors or the Washington State Bar Association, then we should make a change. But it's the concept that we need to have a term limit because we want to have turnover doesn't really apply to an executive director the way it applies to governors. So I urge caution on this amendment. I absolutely understand the basis behind it, but I think in many ways it's a solution in search of a problem, and we have a thing in place right now, which is the authority of the board to hire and fire the executive director. So I recommend we keep it as it is.
I'll pass.
Thank you. We have now, yes, finally, Governor Cicchetti.
Yes, thank you. I do question the timing of this. I do think it's reactionary. I fully agree with everything that Governor Grabicki said. And as Governor Knight was speaking about just a minute ago, I do have concerns how this plays into the executive search. If we decide to do an executive search in a year, then how do those applicants view this? And they might decide not to apply, if we do one, not to apply for that very reason. So I'm opposed. I would be opposed to this.
We will have Governor Kang, and then we'll have Governor Tollefson. Oh, is Governor Stevens' hand up?
Yes.
Let's just go in a row.
Okay. So I think some of the work that we have in front of us, certainly we have various states, not this one, that have term limits for their governor, for their chief executive. For the office of president, we have a term limit. And so I'm not sure how this all applies. One of the things that I would hope we would not do, so I'll noodle this some more, but I think the committee voted unanimously on this, and the committee's going to listen to what your comments are. But the other side of this, I think, really becomes problematic, which is if you start with, let's say, a term of service, not the term limit, but a term of service of 3 years, and you do it again for 3 years, but you start then doing 1 year term after 1 year term, that's also problematic, meaning there needs to be some way that you can come to a place where you actually say, and maybe it's just really term of service, after this term, we want to move in a different direction. But I think those are the things we're going to have to kind of struggle with, because what really gets kind of interesting with this is really what the relationship is with that board. So that board may even say, you know, we've enjoyed it, we've enjoyed your time, and now we have a term limit, and you know we do, but we want you to help us find the new person. And we're not doing it because you haven't done a great job, but you're actually, you know, going in this last 2 years that this is my last 2 years. And then you're involving that person actually in a search for their successor. None of this works when we have a more contentious time. None of it works, and then that's not even about the term limit. That's really, you have this contentious time. So we will take a look at it. But I understand, and it'll come to you, and then we'll take a vote next month, and we'll see what happens.
Okay, I'm just going to go.
Can the president-elect jump in and recognize Governor King?
Thank you. Okay. I am truly conflicted. I think the governors who've spoken make really great points. I can't help but look back at what we experienced in the previous year and found that it's not always easy to do what the board was set up to do. And so for that reason, I understand the intent of this. However, the timing, I have concerns about that. I'm also concerned about, and I really like the point that Governor Russell made about the difference between governors and their term limits versus, executive director, and how their roles are different. And I can't help but think about what the staff and the entity needs, which is stability. And so I'm all I can say is I'm truly conflicted. Thank you.
It's my turn, right? Okay. With all due respect to Governor Grabicki, this is not a traditional nonprofit. In a traditional nonprofit, the key component of an executive director is how good a fundraiser are they. And that's the way they are at colleges, and a lot of colleges and universities that are privately funded, like, Seattle U, for example. So that's going to be a key component to judging what they do and whether to keep them or not keep them and things like that. Here, I kind of think of this like a lot of other government service. I know it's not a government agency. I mean, that's our argument, but folks here get their medical and their dental and their pensions from the state of Washington. So there's a lot of incentive to want to stay on until you qualify and get that pension. And if people know up front, don't count on this job being the golden pension thing, maybe they'll want to move on for other reasons. But I don't think this is a traditional nonprofit. It's more like a traditional, like say a council manager form of government or something like that, where you've got a city manager who, if they stay too long, they get complacent and they just don't, and then the council has to figure out how they're going to get them out of there without having to worry about litigation. And if somebody knows up front that that's the end of the line, you don't have that litigation risk or that litigation uncertainty. Okay, I'm done.
Fair enough. I've removed an executive director before. I've done it gracefully. It can be done. Let's talk a little bit about history here. We're going to look at some further amendments tomorrow that would allow for more than 1 3-year term. We're eliminating 3 and out in the amendments that you're going to look at tomorrow for governors. I think that one of the major weakness in governance in this organization, which resulted in the turmoil that we went through, was the 3 and out policy. You come in here as a new governor, and the first year you haven't got a clue what's going on. And the second year you start to have an idea, and in the third year you're kind of on top of your game, and then you're out, and you can never come back. And what happens is that human nature takes over, and over time, power devolves to the senior staff and the executive director, not because they're bad, not because they're necessarily craving power, but because of this turnover. That's just human nature. We're about to solve that tomorrow. When we adopt those amendments and get rid of the 3 and out, we will have much more stability and much more strength at the board level than we have had in the past. And if we conduct our personnel committee in terms of the evaluation of the ED each year, and conduct ourselves as a board in the evaluation of the ED each year, and always ask that question, are we beginning to get near the end of the line, and then deal with it responsibly and transparently, we'll have a very healthy organization. And when we need turnover, we'll get turnover. But I mean, tomorrow I'm going to be at the Legal Foundation board meeting, my last one. Our ED is going into her 13th year. I cannot imagine saying you're automatically replaced because you've been here more than 10 years. She does a great job. And I think of the other organizations that I've been in where we've had really great EDs, God, I wouldn't want to go through that. And if you're a board member and have the responsibility of now saying bye-bye to this person who's done a great job and is still doing a great job, and now you've got to go out and find somebody, you're just creating chaos for yourself. Don't do it.
I'll take public comment now. Jim McPherson, Gene Cotton.
I agree with most of what PJ said. He's a little bit more vocal about it than I would be, and what Russell said, it's a little bit better. I liked your presentation, Russell. So, but I love you, PJ. You do a good job. But my comment really is this. And I'm not going to steal your thunder, Gene, because she's been whispering in my ear. But I agree with what you might hear next is that the bylaws is not the place to do this. Don't do it in the bylaws. This is not the good time to do it. I agree that it seems a little bit reactionary, and there's better ways to deal with the potential of a problem executive director. One would be to make sure that you have a much tighter description of the kinds of things that they're supposed to do. And then the second thing would be to have contracts, which is, have a 3-year contract, have a 4-year contract, renegotiate the contract, have the contract be as much detailed as you want it to be, so that after 3 years and you know that you got a 5-year contract, you start renegotiating with your executive director to see what they want and see if they're going to sign up again. And then, this is similar to lots of other ways that you can have a position. And then finally, you've got to have evaluation. You've got to have critical evaluation that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. If they are governors, if you have an executive director that is literally the face of your organization instead of your president, that's different. And frankly, that's what my group has done several times over the years. But we expect it that way because people come off and on to the bog. And so that's my comment. And because I won't be here tomorrow because I've got previous commitments, I will briefly say that I agree with PJ on the 3 and out, something I've been talking about for a long time. But I do not think you should be allowed to have 2 consecutive terms. 6 years on the bog is too long. I think what it ought to be is that you're on 3 years, you got to be off for at least 1 term or longer. I love the concept of somebody coming back later. I don't want to lose Hunter because he's young and he'll 10, 20 years from now, he might want to come back. That's exactly what it's for. Not to extend your time on the bog. You can get on up to speed in a year. You don't need to be hanging around more than 3 at a time. Thank you.
All right, we'll do it.
So I have to kick him in the parking lot because he did take most of my thunder. I agree with a lot of things that are on the opposite side of the argument that have been expressed. Part of me likes the idea of a term, because if you have this bang-up, excellent, outstanding leader, what an outstanding leader does is they train proteges to rise to their level, so when they're ready to move on, The legacy is they've left somebody truly amazing behind. Okay? So, on that side of the argument is where I see that. And because of what just recently happened. But one of the pieces that's missing here is, what does the contract say, the employment contract, without knowing how it addresses the length of the contract, the official duties, the prohibitions, the permissions, and so forth. It's hard to assess whether or not there is a need for a limitation in the bylaws. Okay? And then on the other side of the argument, PJ mentioned, you do your evaluations. Well, that sounds good. And I agree with you. But for how many years were the people wearing your shoes, not you, not doing their job? So evaluations alone doesn't cut it. Because we all heard things over the years, true or not, rumor or fact, but the bottom line was there never seemed to be any change or any corrective action or whatever it was, at least visible to the rest of the world. It may have been happening and kept secret, but we didn't know it. And then the shoe dropped. So I think you got to look at the term of the contract, certainly, and you've got to look at whether it doesn't have a term, if it's just every year or whatever, maybe your bylaws. But more importantly, I think delineating what this person can and cannot do. Because when you are the face of this bar and you're an employee instead of elected, should you be the one knocking on the governor's door without your permission or on the Chief Justice's door without your permission? If those things are allowed, great. If they are not to be allowed, it should be in the job description and in the contract.
Thank you. Any other member comments? Or public comments, I should say? Fantastic. We have Governor Hunter on the phone, who hasn't spoken yet, and then we have Governor Swagel.
Yes, I have. Hello? Hello?
Yep. Go ahead, Governor Hunter.
Can you hear me, you guys?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Real briefly, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think Gene has a good point. We could put it in the employment contract. But somebody made the comment a while back that said, if this person's doing a good job, then we want to hang on to them. Well, doing a good job is very, very subjective. And if we had a term limit, then we wouldn't need to worry about it. If we wanted to keep somebody on a little bit longer, then we had that in the contract, then I think that's kind of the best of both worlds. But, it's reactive, and I'm reacting to what just happened because the board has authority that it was very, very difficult for them to exercise that authority. And if we put something in the bylaws that says these are the parameters and they can't be changed, then I think that leaves a little bit more stability. And if everybody knows going in that the position is a 10-year position, then there shouldn't be any discussion or quarreling or concern about it. But it was a very contentious situation that we had, and I don't want to see that repeated for anybody. So my feeling is that we ought to have term limits on the executive director. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Governor Swagel.
Well, I think I have a solution that addresses everyone's concerns. I understand the valid points that are made on the other side of the issue that are, folks who are not in favor of term limits. I think a solution would be that there's a 10-year term limit and that every year thereafter, if we want to keep the person on, 70% of the board has to approve the continuation of that contract. And that prevents the issue of essentially what happens is you get a captive agency to Governor Grabicki's point. because of, whatever, and this happens frequently, a board can lose control to a strong executive, and this board lost control to a strong executive. So that happens after 10 years with connections, with influence, with power, all sorts of power. So if after 10 years we want to keep an executive director on, 70% of the board has to ratify that contract. So I think that addresses all of the concerns myself.
Thank you, Governor. I look forward to seeing your amendment.
So,
yeah. Governor Stevens.
Yeah. So I will want to have some. I'm looking at General Counsel because one, I would hope that if people want to provide amendments, that they will do so sooner rather than later, so they can actually go back to the committee. I'm going to operate on the theory that since the topic has been here for first read, amendments that may come up will be okay and not reset the clock. And so I would hope that people, I would hope, for example, that Governor Grabicki would take a shot at not just saying don't do this, but if you understand what the issues are, perhaps you can come up with what we ought to do. I worry about, as I mentioned, when you get into the annual piece. I worry about that because I don't think that gives you actual time to say, okay, you know what, I don't think this is going to work, but for you to continue. But if the relationship is decent, you would want to have some sort of a bridge between the person ending and the search and the hiring of the other person, I would hope, so that you're not getting into, because annual, you're really rolling over then, and I think you back yourself into some of then other decisions where, okay, this gets rolled over and this gets rolled over, and then suddenly you say, well, we've got to stop, and kind of the question is why. But in any case, if we can have other ideas, Paul, if you want to take a shot at it, but we'll take a look at it.
Personnel meeting then on January 13th?
No.
Currently, yes.
January?
Yes, currently it is.
Okay. We have to look at a special meeting.
Yeah.
So I think we're gonna need to meet in December, and we'll take a look at when.
Any other comment or discussion? Okay. Well, Governors, thank you for those interesting insights and perspectives and sharing them with everyone. I really appreciated the discussion. With that, we're going to move to our next item, also being presented by our chair of our Personnel Committee and supported by our Director of Human Resources. The next item, the proposal of the Personnel Committee.
Okay. So if you recall, when I gave my report, there were other items that the committee was taking a look at regarding both placing some limits on the authority of the executive director as well as compensation. And then we got into various discussions where I think also, especially Governor Tolleson put on the table that things were still in a state of flux regarding structures in the legislature, et cetera, et cetera. And the thought was, one, because I came into the committee thinking what we would do is get in place a search process and begin to move in that direction. But we have a lot of pending things that even impact on what would what we would be saying regarding the position, both term limits, if there are such things, compensation limits, if there are such things, the authority to hire key members, and then with this other thing, I think the committee said, you know what we probably need to do is actually extend the contract for the interim executive director so we can at least release the pressure of trying to get this all done this year. And so the committee, I think, I took a unanimous vote to do that, and we are recommending to the board that we extend the interim executive director's contract by a year. If we pass this would be a year from this date, as I recall, that was what we said. So with that, I will, as the chair, I'll move it. Mr. President.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay. We now have a motion on the table that has been seconded. And don't worry, you'll all get to talk. I'm going to ensure that every governor who wants to talk has an opportunity to talk. Governor Cicchetti, do you have any thoughts on this matter?
No.
Governor McBride, do you have any thoughts on this? Governor
No.
Okay. Governor King?
No.
Governor Tollefson? Nope. Governor Grabicki?
Oh, yes.
Good.
We talked about this in budget and audit about 2 or 3 meetings ago. And what came up was we were looking at the line item for executive search, which I think was $60,000. And we said, don't spend it right now. Just don't spend it. And then we went on to say, you know, Tara's doing an excellent job right now. And she's faced with a major challenge. And that's this deep dive that we're about to do, that we're in now, where we're going to look at all the cost centers, all the programs, and make some hard decisions. And in order to manage, the executive director is going to have to manage that and lead it. And in order to do that, she's going to have to manage the frustrations and insecurities of staff going through that, which are natural. That's human nature. She's going to have to manage the programs that are special, either to certain staff members or certain board members. She's going to have to manage all of the work that's going to have to be done to get that done. And it was the feeling of at least, I think, most of us, that if she leads us through that successfully, that's one hell of a test. And at that point, we don't need to do a search. We've got somebody who's fairly amazing. So I'm in favor of extending the contract for a year, as personnel has suggested. But I think that if she successfully leads us through this deep dive and is able to manage staff, senior staff, people who want to protect programs, and get us through this in a way where budget and audit says, yes, this was an excellent experience, and the board as a whole says, yes, this was an excellent experience, we got to a good outcome. At that point, we don't need a search. We know what we've got. We've put somebody through a very severe executive test that they have passed with flying colors.
Governor Abell?
I think this is an important step for institutional stability, and I would support it. Thank you.
Governor Peterson?
I agree with PJ.
Governor Higginson?
No comments.
Governor Swagel?
Yeah, so in the Personnel Committee, this was my motion, and I think that Ms. Nevitt has been doing an excellent job. I'd actually like to propose a friendly amendment, and I think it's very consistent with, and I kind of came into this meeting knowing I was going to make this friendly amendment, and it's very consistent with Governor Grabicki's sentiments. I'd like to add to the proposal that the term interim be removed. So I'd like to extend another year and remove the term interim in the interest of stability, in the interest of acknowledging, that Ms. Nevitt's doing an excellent job, and we're extending another year, removing the term. I think it puts the organization on a little firmer ground, but she does have another year to kind of prove herself, and gives us an opportunity to see how she performs for another year.
Governor Knight. Governor.
Hello.
Oh, I'm sorry, Governor Hunter. I forgot you were right there next to Governor Higginson and Swagel in corporeal form. Governor Hunter.
Yes, I would support what Paul just said. So if that was a motion, Paul, I'm seconding it.
It was a motion.
We'll do it now.
Second.
Okay. Governor Knight. Oh, thanks. Governor Clark.
Okay, I would support the 1 year extension. A question that I would have: if the title was removed when the year was up, would we? Okay, what happens then? Would we vote then to extend or
Personnel would have to come back and say, okay, so we extended this position for another year from X date to Y date. The title changed, roughly halfway through. I don't know how far we are through, or 1/3 of the way through. And we'd essentially be in the same position, but we wouldn't be going around always saying, she wouldn't go around saying, I'm interim executive director, I'm executive director. And I haven't asked her if she wants that. She would obviously have a say. Maybe she wants to be considered interim executive director, but I don't know.
Governor Clark?
Sure, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm good, the rest of it.
Great.
Thank you.
First, before we get back to the governors going around, I'm going to ask Director Neal to give some informational input, then I'm going to go to the public, and then I'll come back to governors.
So the contract that you would basically create for the 1 year term, interim means nothing to that. And by that I mean you can exclude the word interim and just make the contract about every single thing you want to identify by way of the criterion for what you're determining to be a successful outcome. This would essentially be the first step in, as Governor Kubicki has said, is the evaluative criterion for how she's doing. And the term interim would essentially be meaningless. It's the contract that matters, not the term. So I just want to be clear about that. I'm working on some other things as it relates to supportive information, as we talked about in the last Personnel Committee meeting, that would help to further identify how you make sure that you have a good outcome.
Great. And I'll just an informational point to the board. I had talked to the interim executive director, and she was willing to give up the clause of being able to get the job of advancement back if we took the interim term off her title, which would allow her then to fill the director of advancement position, which would also let that person fill below positions, which are all interim up and down the line. Is there any member feedback on this matter? I see Nancy Hawkins and then Jean Cotton.
My comments have nothing to do with Tara's work whatsoever. What I've observed is great. But I look at the optics from outside the organization, that if you took the interim away so that she was then spending the next year being referred to as the executive director, and then a year from now you make the decision to hire someone else, to the outside world it's getting rid of 2 executive directors in 2 or 3 years. That looks like an unstable organization. So that's my worry if the word interim is taken away.
Jean Cotton.
Felix covered most of what I was thinking, and so did Nancy, but...
Speak a little closer to the microphone.
I've never been accused of not being loud enough, Rajiv. The term interim executive director is not in the bylaws, so it's a separate contract issue. it's purely a contract issue. Executive director is defined in the bylaws, and termination is subject to that in addition to whatever the contract is. You're creating a bag of worms. I love Tara too. But this isn't about the individual who's occupying the position right now. This is the technicalities. I think you need to talk to your employment law attorney to find out what the effect of that kind of a change would be, and give her an extension as interim right now. And in January, if you want to make it a one-year contract as ED, have the information available to make that decision intelligently, okay, instead of on the fly and emotionally.
We'll go to Governor Stevens and then Governor Kang, but I think I will just narrate that I think Personnel Committee did at least discuss this, but Governor Stevens can enlighten us.
Yeah, well, no, I don't think we discussed
okay.
this proposal. When I gave my opening comments, one of the things I pointed out was how long the previous person had served. And I don't know how long, but I thought it might have been, and maybe Gene or Doug, if you were here, could tell me how long Jan Michaels served. That's what I thought. My concern, so when we're talking about returning involvement and engagement of the members, and have the members be involved and engaged. And then I think about the fact that at least in basically good times, the selection of the executive director comes around like a comet. We have a number of things on the table that, yes, she's going to be managing, but there are things also going on regarding both what the structure is going to be, regarding what our strategic plan is going to be, what our mission is going to be. And if I recall, when we took the other actions regarding the previous incumbent, there were a number of corners of our association who were quite upset that they had nothing to say in the matter and had no involvement. And I actually look at the idea, one, of a search, because I just don't come from a philosophy that simply because I know this person and what they're doing right now is, one, either the only person, or two, the best person if we never go out and look. Never. Or if we don't look this time. And actually so that we can determine what that job should be and how it should work. And actually take the time and say, this is what we're looking for. Not the person who's having the job right now is doing a great job, but what are we looking for now and for the future in terms of leadership? And not to say, well, I don't think there's anybody out there, as opposed to actually having that opportunity. So that if you actually then chose her, you chose her not because that's the only person you knew, but because you actually said, here's the job, who's going after it, and she came out the winner. But I think that adds something then for her as well. That's very important, which is, yeah, we did this because everything was going good. Well, there are times that you do that kind of a process so that you're all reminded when things aren't going so good that you didn't have a coronation, this person actually won it, and you actually have then the idea of what you're looking for and examining that. Now, I may be on the on the losing end of that argument. But I would just tell you, you miss an opportunity to engage the entire association in who will be the next executive director. And if that's okay, okay. But I think that's why I supported the idea of interim executive director for a year. I think it does get kind of crazy, and we're backing into, well, we're just going to do this thing. We don't need to look. We don't need to actually, except for where we might want to limit some powers, we don't actually want to look at what the job description should be, because we're just going to back into it, and they've got the job. I'm not sure that's the way to do that, especially when you're talking about increments of, one person for 7 years, one person for 15 years, and if you're right, one person for 10 years. So,
Governor King.
Thank you. I'm going to keep this short and just address the issue about dropping the interim from the title. I personally don't believe that would be inconsequential. I think that it comes with possible consequences that we haven't really thought about. And I think Jeannie Cotton kind of addressed some of that. Once you drop that word, I think there are other things that kind of kick in that can make things more difficult for us. So that's something for us to really think about. And because I haven't really delved deep into it, I don't know exactly what those are, but I think we need to look into that. And secondly, again, I agree again with Jeannie Cotton about the message that we're sending. I'm also concerned about the message that we're sending to the members, the public, and also to staff. So for those reasons, I think that is actually a big deal. Thank you.
Thank you. Governor Abell and then Governor Grabicki.
Just very briefly, I agree with both Alex and Jean's comments. One other potential group that it may impact would be the pool of potential candidates who might apply in a year. Thank you.
Governor Grabicki.
I think we should go ahead and vote to extend the contract for 1 year tonight, and then we should have a conversation with Tara in which we say that we are open to dropping the interim title if she wants to do that. Of course, that means that we're probably going to get rid of interim with something else and permanently fill a position that she previously held, and she may not want to do that. She may want to keep that position open in case she's not the executive director after a year. But I think we tell her that, look, you're going to be here as either the interim or executive director, one title or the other, for at least 1 more year. And it's our current intention that if you successfully execute this difficult plan that is before you now, that will enter into a more permanent contract that goes from year to year. And just find out whether she wants to drop the interim, because there is an implication there where she can't flip back at that point if she's filled the position permanently where she was before. And I think we'd have to make clear to her that our commitment is for 1 year, and our intention is to look seriously at her for the long term, assuming that she executes the current situation successfully in our view. That'd be my thought.
Governor Swigel.
Well, those are all good comments. I'll withdraw my motion.
Your proposed amendment to the underlying motion, which was put forward by Governor Stevens, which was the Personnel Committee's recommendation to extend the interim contract by 1 year and was seconded by PJ Grabicki. That's back on the floor. I mean, that's back on. Now that's what we're discussing again, since the other motion proposing to amend it has been removed.
And I move to call the question.
Very good. I heard a double motion, which I will construe as a motion and a second. And I will, and just for the record, I heard Paul Swigel first, so he made the motion. Dan Clark will have seconded it. The question, and now we're going to vote on whether we take a vote on the underlying question. All in favor of having a vote on the question?
Damn it.
Oh, Governor Hunter, yes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you can't hear me well or something, but I'm screaming into the phone to try to make a comment. But now the question's been called, so I can't make the comment. So,
well, Governor Hunter, if you were trying to get my attention, that's my error. Rex is boldly and courageously taking fault for it, Governor Hunter. So please, due to administrative error, give your comment.
Okay, it's very quick. I think a number of people spoke, so I can't remember and give credit to everybody. But I think we should extend her for a year. We should take up the interim, tell her that we're extending it for a year, and it's sort of a quote-unquote probationary kind of thing. Assess the performance in a year as the board. If we think she's great, okay, we do the contract. If we still want to look at that time, we start looking. I don't think we should start looking now.
I apologize, Governor Hunter. I have about 53 seconds left to conclude this business of this meeting, so I'm going to call the question. I'm going to continue with our motion to all who want to vote on this matter, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Any abstained? Now we're going to have the actual question on the motion, which is the motion made by Governor Stevens on behalf of the Personnel Committee, which advances the idea that we'll extend the contract by 1 year. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. And with that, because, now this is very careful language I have to use because of OPMA. We did not get to all our business today. We're running about an hour and 20 minutes behind. So I am adjourning this meeting to be continued at 9 a.m. tomorrow, where we will pick up directly where we left off with the very handsome president of the organization discussing executive committee matters. Thank you.